my materials together, I've cut out all of the pattern pieces and where necessary put the interfacing on the back. Some of them also have the fleece, and if you just take a note where the fleece comes around here, I've cut mine away from the seam allowances. So if you have a look in the instructions, there are page at the front, and it tells you all about the interfacing and suggests, it's up to you of course, but if you're using a thicker interfacing, on what pieces you might want to just cut it away from the seam allowances. So we need to transfer some pattern markings over. On piece B, just here, this is the inside of my flap. As this, I've cut my inside and outside the same, but on your flap lining, you need to transfer the dot here over to this piece. On the outside main part of the bag, you'll need to transfer over this marking. This one's going to be for our snap on the outside, and also make a mark for your straps if you're going to put in your straps or ribbon on your pattern. And then on the lining piece, across the pattern piece centre where we have the two dotted lines just here, you'll need to transfer those lines also over onto your lining. Now I've used a heat erasable pen, so either use something like that can be erased with heat or water, or use a chalk marker, not a regular ballpoint pen, so that you'll see the lines afterwards. So we will start with our slip pocket. This is going to be the pocket that will be open, and if you take one of the pattern pieces and just fold it in half, and I'm just going to pop a couple of pins in there and then stitch along the top edge here. We have a 1 centimetre seam allowance, 3/8 of an inch, and just along the top, not on the sides because we'll need to leave those open for turning. So the pocket piece is now sewn, and I've turned it the right way out and given it a good press. This is my sewn edge along the top, my folded edge just here, and I'm now going to match this up to where I have the lines here. I'm going to match it to the top line, and I'll lie the bottom along that top line and just pop a couple of pins in place. I'm now going to sew 2 lines of stitches. So where I've got this fold here lined up with the red line, I'm going to sew along the bottom of the pocket to secure that in place, quite close to the bottom, and then I will measure to find the centre of this pocket, and I'll do a line of stitching vertically from top to bottom. If you wanted more smaller pockets rather than 2 larger ones, of course you vary your lines of stitching according to whatever you're going to put in your pouch. So those will be my 2 lines, and then on the sides here, just within the seam allowance, I'm then going to baste the sides of those pockets in place. So this pocket is now in place, and we'll put this to one side. We're going to work on the earring holder. So this is the pattern piece. I've cut a couple of pieces and just given them a light interfacing. It shows on here the seam allowance that you need, so that's helpful. And we just need to place them face together, and we're going to sew around 3 sides and leave one of the long sides open because we'll turn that too. So I'll sew one side across here, up the other side, and then I'll clip the corners, turn it around the other way, right sides out, and give it a press. So my piece for the earrings is now sewn, and you have a couple of options of what you can pop inside. You can either use a thin sheet of cardboard, like a greetings card, or on mine, you can see I've just used a piece of vinyl. It just gives it a little bit of extra strength and makes somewhere for us to hold our earrings in place. And then you need to determine what kind of earrings you're going to put. If you can have very long and dangly ones, you'll maybe want to have those at the bottom. And then if you have smaller studs, you know, they'll be closer together. If you prefer a larger earring, then your holes will be farther apart. So determine what kind of earrings are going to go in there, and then you'll want to mark some lines and some holes. There are some pattern placement suggestions in your instructions, but of course it's yours, so you make them wherever you need them to be. So I've used a ruler, drawn a couple of lines and marked off where I wanted my holes to be, some smaller ones here, wider apart at the bottom, and then I've used this rather ferocious looking tool. It's got a long point on the end, and just gone through and made a hole in each of these places where I'd marked, and I've gone through all layers. So those are now ready, and I'm just going to dab a little bit of Fray Check front and back on all of these holes just to stop any fraying of those later on. There you can see a view of them on the back. Then I'll give it a press and just get rid of my marks. So this little piece is now ready to place, and on the lining I've drawn a line 2 centimetres or 3/4 of an inch or so down from the top just here, and now I'm going to fold over a little bit at the top towards the back and line that up on this line. I'll just pop in a couple of pins. Oh, I seem to have got a blunt one there. Pop a couple of pins to hold that in place. Of course, I've got my vinyl in there. If you've got cardboard too, you might find it difficult to pin, in which case you might just have to hold it while you sew. And then we'll sew along the top close to this folded edge, and then I'll do another line of stitching underneath, and that will enclose this folded edge that we've got here, so that when you turn up, the folded edge will be secured under there. Now we need to work on something a little bit fiddly. These are our chain holders, and there are 2 ways of doing it. With this one, I've sewn a tiny tube, left one side open, and then I've turned it inside out and just folded the raw edge over just here. On this one, and this leaves obviously no stitching around the outside on that one. On this one, I've taken the same piece of fabric and I've folded in all these raw edges, and then I can fold it together in half and stitch around all 4 sides, and it creates the same tiny little piece of fabric, but obviously one will have stitching on the around the outside and one won't, so it depends on which method you prefer. I'm going to do one of each. So my 2 chain holders are now sewn in place. Just put a little square with a line through. You can see there, so those have been sewn. If you look in the pattern directions, it'll tell you exactly where you need to place them. And when they're folded up, they'll look like this with our chains or whatever you want to held in there. Now obviously we need to create some kind of closure, and you can either use some kind of snap or press stud and so on, and sewing the press stud is covered in the instructions. But you could also just use a little bit of Velcro if you wanted to. So I've got these little Velcro circles which are designed for use on fabric, and I'm just going to make my life easy, and I'm going to stick one of these on. Obviously it'll be a little bit too large, so I'm just going to cut that down, and then I'll stick one here and one here, and when I fold that up, that will then hold that nicely in place. So my little Velcro things are in place. We can pop that to one side for now, because now we need to work on our zipper pocket. So the first thing we need to do is shorten our zipper, and we're going to take off this metal end on the zipper here because we don't want to hit that with our needle. So make sure your zipper is closed, your zipper pull is pulled all the way up this way, and we're going to snip off the end. And obviously whatever you do, do not open your zip now, because your zipper pull will go right off the end. So we're not going to do that. And we'll need to take our 2 pieces of the zipper ends fabric. So now we take the zipper end pieces, that's pattern piece F, and just turn over on the short edge a narrow hem around 1/4 of an inch and press those in. And now on the edge of the zipper where we've cut the end, I'm just going to fold it in half. Align those edges to make sure it's even on both sides, and then we're going to stitch that in place. So stitch close to the edge here and catch the fabric on the back at the same time. So now I have the top of my other pocket piece, and once we've got the zipper trimmed, the finished length needs to be the same as this top pocket. So I can see here what I need to do. I need to cut a little bit off my zipper. So I'm just going to open that there, match up this edge with the top of the pocket here, same on the other side, fold this in half, and now if I pop my little tab there, I can see, okay, so I need to cut my zipper off at this point just here, equal with this other corner on that pocket. And now obviously don't close the zip because you'll take the zipper pull all the way off the end, but we'll just push those two ends together, and the same as we did on this other end of the zipper, I'm going to enclose those ends within that pattern piece F, the zipper pull cover, and then sew again close to the edge so that it will end up looking like the other one, and the finished length will be the same as the top length on this pocket. So it's time now to switch to your zipper foot, and I've lined the edge of the zipper up with the edge of the pocket just here and stitched along this side. The pocket right side is facing the zipper teeth, and that is stitched together, so that's your first step. And then turn this out the other way, just finger press it nice and smooth, and take the other raw edge of the pocket, fold that up to the top, and if we align those raw edges, we'll now sew on the other side of the zipper from here to the other side. So now I've turned the tube the right way out and given it a press, and if you look very carefully along the top of the zipper just here, I've got the zipper and then I've pressed it so there's just a small amount of fabric showing above the zipper. It just creates a nice smooth edge along the top. And now there's a couple of ways that you can attach this. We've still got our line here on the main piece, and I'm going to line up the bottom of the pocket against that line, same way as we did for this other one. And now you've got a couple of options. You can either sew it in place, or you can leave it open. So although the instructions tell you to sew it in place, there's a little variation in this video. And so I want to leave a pocket at the back just here, so that I've got a zipper pocket at the front, and then at the back where I've got my chains can sit down in behind. If you want to sew it in place, then add a couple of pins to make sure it's not going to move, and stitch directly along this line at the top. So you'll stitch along this line where the fold is between the fabric and the zipper, and that will hold the top of the pocket in place. But if you want to leave this pocket open, then just make sure that you line up your edges, and you'll sew the bottom of the pocket first. So I'll do that on my example. So my zipper pocket's now in place. I've stitched close to the edge just here, and then I've basted these side seams, and I just did a small amount of stitching up in the top just here, just to make sure that it's going to be nice and secure. And that gives me the benefit of having the zipper pocket, but at the same time I've also got another pocket just here, so I can put extra little bits and pieces in there too. Okay, so let's move on now to making our ring holder. So now we're working on making the ring holder, and we've got our piece of fabric and our piece of fleece. So I have turned in and pressed the seam allowance on all four sides of the piece of fabric, and then fused the fleece into the centre. Now my machine doesn't deal well with a lot of layers, so I've just trimmed a little bit of extra away from my fleece on this side. Depending on how thick your fabric and your fleece and things are, you may want to do the same, because the next thing we need to do is then just lightly roll this up, and when we get to this other end, make sure that you keep that seam allowance turned in, and then we'll get like a big cigar shape, and you'll need to hand stitch. So you'll just hand stitch lightly to hold that end in place. And this part here, where I trimmed away some of the seam allowance and the fleece, is now a little flatter, and this is going to be my end which I'll sew in. But let me do the hand sewing first, and then we'll have a look at that. So my little ring holder is now completed, sewn along the back. This is the end where I've cut out the fleece, so this one is a little flatter than this other end, and this will be the end that I'm going to sew in place. So I'm just going to pick where I want it, about there, and then the same as we did for the chain holders up here, I'm just going to sew that in place on this one end. Of course we need to leave the other end open to get our rings on, so I'll sew that one in place first of all, and then we'll have a look at the other end. So my ring holder is now sewn in place, and I just need to put some kind of clip or snap up at the top. Now the same with these other ones, if you're going to be using your jewellery case for travelling, then maybe you need to make things a little bit more secure, and you should replace the Velcro with proper snaps so things aren't going to come undone during travel. But I'm just going to use mine at home, so I'm just going to do exactly the same as I did here, and just put a little bit of Velcro on the inside here and here. and that will hold that in place sufficiently just to keep the few rings that I'll want to store in it. Now it's time for us to work on the bag flap. The first thing we need to do is insert the metal clasp, the magnetic snap there, and one of our pieces, the inside, the lining, has got the little mark. So exactly on the reverse of the mark, just here, I've added an extra piece of interfacing just to stop the little snap from poking through too much. So the way I like to add the snap, where I've got the mark just here, I'm just going to centre the snap over the mark, and if I give it a little push, then it makes some indentations in the fabric, and I'm just going to use my seam ripper to make a little hole. Nothing too big because I don't want to go too far. Press that through. Oh, maybe they haven't made them quite big enough. Let's see. Oh yeah, it's getting there. There we go, they're through. And now I put this on the other side, and I'm going to get a big pointy tool and just press those in place. So now it's time to match these two pieces right side together, and we'll stitch around just the curved edge with a 1/2 centimetre or about 3/8 of an inch seam allowance, and leave this top part open. And once you've got your seam, because it's a curved seam, you'll then need to just clip into your seam allowances, and we'll turn it the right way out and give it a press. So my flap is now sewn, turned and pressed, and if you want to, you can just stitch around this curved edge to keep things in place, or it's optional, it's entirely up to you. I'm just going to pop that to one side, because now we're going to start assembling everything. So I'm going to get my pieces of ribbon and just cut this in half. And remember that ribbon has a tendency to fray, so either lightly scorch the ends or use a fray check or something on the ends to stop your ribbons from fraying. And now we're going to start putting everything together. So now we're going to start putting everything together, and if you take the outer fabric piece, we have 3 marks. The first one in the centre here is for the magnetic snap, so go ahead and install that the same as you did for the bag flap. And then we have 2 marks on the side which are for our optional straps. So if you've decided to make fabric ties, or you're going to use ribbon ties, just baste those into the seam allowances at the present time. And then we're just going to tie them in a loose bow in the centre, because as far as possible, obviously we don't want these bits of ribbon or our fabric ties ending up in the seam allowances and being sewn in by mistake. So now we're going to start putting things together, and it's time to decide which way up you want your inner piece to go. So if you think about the outer part of the bag, where the magnetic snap is just here, if we folded this up, this will be the front of the bag when it's finished, and you would lift the flap and open this out. So then you decide on the inner of the bag, do you want it to go with your chains and ring holder at the top, or do you want it to go with your earring holder at the top? It's entirely up to you. I think I'm going to go with mine that way, so that when I open it, it will be like that on the inside. So I now need to just place those two face together and pin around the outside, and then we'll have a look at the sewing. So now I've got my inside and outside pinned together around all 4 sides, but we need to decide which end to leave open, and we're actually going to sew this end. So we're going to sew this end closed, the end that's closest to the magnetic snap, and this end that doesn't have the snap is the one that we're going to leave open. So sew around all the 3 sides, leaving the end opposite to the snap as the one open. So everything's now sewn all around the edges, and before I turned it, I just trimmed away some of the bulk in the seams here to make it a little easier to turn, and I've turned it and given it a press. And now it's time for us to deal with the top up here. So we just need to turn in our seam allowance and then take it back to the ironing board and give it another press. Obviously try and do this nice and evenly, but you should have the fleece in here, the edge of the fleece if you've used it, as a guide, so you can use that as a guide and press this over. And then we'll need to take our flat piece and pin that inside. So I'll do my pressing and then we'll come back. So my edge is pressed and I've just popped a few pins in to keep the folds down in, and obviously I want to make sure that the two meet fairly evenly up at the top there. Now it's time to pop our flat piece inside. We want to do it so that the magnetic snap is facing up, and we're just going to pop that down in there. Level, the bottom here will be level with the turned in seam allowance that we've just pressed, and then we want to make sure that it's square and centered, and pop a couple of pins in place, because then what we need to do is just check that it's going to meet up with our snap on the front. And once you're happy that it's in place correctly, then we need to stitch it to keep it there. Okay, so now pinned in place, and that will obviously turn over and meet with the magnetic snap on the other side, and we'll stitch from one side all the way across to the other, and just fiddle with your seams a little bit on these edges to make sure that they match up nice and neatly and you get a nice neat finish on both sides. Once your flap is sewn, close up your snap, tie your ties on the back, and your jewellery purse is now finished. I hope you've enjoyed sewing this project and that you'll get a lot of use out of your jewellery purse. It's a fun thing to sew, not too difficult, and it is useful. Of course, makes a nice gift, or you can use it for travel, or just use it like I'm going to do, just to store my daily jewellery at home. Thank you very much for watching and following along, and I hope you'll join me again on Sew So Easy, and let's sew something else together. Bye bye.